Howdy folks, it's the Creepy Kentuckian here with you from Dead Pit Radio. Today, we are taking a look at two separate releases that came out recently from our good friends over at Kino Lorber. They're both part of their Studio Classics line, which dives into all kinds of different genres of films. A lot of horror films, action films, vigilante films, which is what we're taking a look at today. And when you say vigilante, do you think of anyone more than Charles effing Bronson? Probably not. The Death Wish movies started back in the 70s, went all the way up to the mid-90s. There was a total of 5 of them, and today we are going to take a look at the final 2. Death Wish 4, The Crackdown, and Death Wish 5, The Face of Death. Yes, and that's not saying that Charles Bronson lived like another 10 years after this. So even though he was older in part 5, he still lived a little while. That's not the face of death right there. I mean, he was closer to death. He was 70 some odd years old in Death Wish 5. But that was just, it had nothing to do with his age, Charles Bronson. He was a bad mamma jamma even at 72 years old or however old he was. But anyway, Kino brought both of these out recently. Snazzy new Blu-ray editions, boys. Look at that. Look at that. So, I thought it'd be a good opportunity taking a look at some classic Charles Bronson goodness and talk about both of these movies. These releases came out last week, and I don't want anybody to sleep on this stuff because these, if you're a fan of the Death Wish movies, I know that Kino did a 4K of the original film as well. So aside from Death Wish 2 and 3, they're all from Kino. I don't know if Kino's going to get 3. I'm not sure who owns 3. 2 was through Vinegar Syndrome, I believe. 3 is probably one of the more beloved sequels. But these, I think these may be a little bit underrated, guys. Both of these. We're going to dive into the movies themselves, the revenge pictures. Charles Bronson's looking to get revenge in both of these movies and pretty much all of the Death Wish movies. That's the running thing. Charles Bronson's wife or girlfriend gets murdered and he's out for revenge, basically. That's pretty much all of them. But anyway, we're going to dive into the movies one by one. First, we're going to take a look at Death Wish 4. Charles Bronson returns as Paul Kersey, the architect / vigilante who has had enough yet again. Kersey's girlfriend Karen in the movie, her daughter overdoses on some lethal crack, and Kersey takes on members of the sadistic LA drug cartel with help and funding from his millionaire friend Nathan White, who wants to avenge his own daughter's death. Kersey vows to take the drug lords down if it's the last thing he does. The vigilante Paul Kersey is back in Death Wish 4. I understand these movies are not very plot driven, right? It's usually somebody gets killed, Kersey gets pissed off. I think Death Wish 4 was the second film that Canon Pictures Golden Globus did. Infamous back in the 80s. I don't even want to start naming movies because there were so many back in the day. They did all kinds of those ninja movies. I think they did Red Sonja. I think they may have done both of the Conan movies, possibly. American Ninja, Ninja 3, The Domination. Golden Globus had a hand in all that shit. And there's some of my favorite movies, like cheesy, crappy movies, honestly. But they're entertaining. That's the big difference. They're crappy movies, usually, but they're entertaining. And this is along the same lines. I mean, it's cheesy. Like, there's a lot of really unbelievable shit in this. Interesting thing though, J. Lee Thompson, who worked with Bronson quite a bit, also did a horror film back in the day, which we actually reviewed, which Kino actually released last year. Happy Birthday to Me. I think that was his one big horror movie. He also directed Cape Fear, the original Cape Fear from the 60s classic movie. So definitely a capable director here. Very well, technically well made movie. Bronson is starting to age a little bit here. I think he was in his 60s at this point, but it was still fine. I think he still pulled the character off pretty well. Definitely better than the next movie, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit. Other fun stuff that's in Death Wish 4. A lot of people always reference the video store scene, which features another canon picture from around that time period. I think it's the standee of Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, the Leatherface in that movie. And there's also Breaking poster, Missing in Action, stuff like that in there. Also, another fun aspect of Death Wish 4 is Danny Trejo, very young Danny Trejo, can be seen briefly in a scene here. Now, Death Wish 4 is fun. It's fine for what it is. It's entertaining enough. But you could kind of tell where the series was heading. I think it may have had a big peak with part 3. Like Death Wish 1, 2, and 3 are all pretty damn solid movies. And this one's okay. I don't think it's on par with the previous 3 movies, but it's respectable. I will give it that. So that is Death Wish 4, The Crackdown. These releases here, no extras on them. There is a commentary with film historian Paul Talbot, the author of Bronson's Loose books, which I'm not familiar with. And there's also theatrical trailers and stuff like that's included as a bonus as well. Transfer on this, fantabulous, looked great. This does come in a slipcover, which has slightly different artwork under the slip. Basic release, no frills edition. There's not a reversible cover or anything on it. And that is Death Wish 4. Continuing on, though, boys, it's the face of death. Death Wish 5. Death Wish 5, the final theatrical film of Charles Bronson. Paul Kersey is now living in New York City and engaged to fashion designer Olivia Regent, played by Leslie Ann Downs, who is over 20 years younger than Paul Kersey. He's got to be hung like a horse to be pulling Leslie Ann Downs, who, she's murdered, of course, and her daughter is kidnapped by an Irish gang led by Tommy O'Shea, played wonderfully by Michael Parks, who pretty much makes this entire movie. Now the vigilante side of Paul Kersey returns to make things right, to save Olivia's daughter and the day again. There's some funny shit in this one too. Robert Joy, who we aptly called Robert Dick Joy from Land of the Dead back in the day. He's been in a ton of stuff. But he is in this as one of the mercenaries. He's like a transgender mercenary in this, which is kind of funny. Again, Michael Parks does such an excellent job in this. He's really the all-star of this movie. Death Wish 5 was directed by Alan A. Goldstein, who really didn't do much of anything of note. Dog's Best Friend in 1998, Jungle Boy 1998, Pact with the Devil in 2004, Snake Man in 2005. I haven't heard of any of that shit. His most well-known film is Death Wish 5. This one, now the previous movie, Death Wish 4, was 1987. This one was 7 years later, 1994, this thing was released. Briefly in theaters. People were like, holy shit, like, Charles Bronson is elderly in this. Which he's pretty close, man. He's like 71, 72 years old when this movie came out. And he really had no business starring as like the hero in a movie at that age. And definitely had aged quite a bit in those 7 years in between movies. It's okay though. Hey, I actually enjoyed it because of Michael Parks. he does such a great job as that Tommy O'Shea, like evil fucking gangster guy. And I think this movie was kind of right after Canon Pictures went belly up. It was a brief company that Manheim Golden started, 21st Century Films or something like that. This movie, though, man, like, it's entertaining enough, and I just enjoy movies like this. I mean, you know, I could watch vigilante revenge movies all day, and it'd been a while since I'd seen any of these Death Wish movies. But this is just very cheaply made. It doesn't look like anything that would be out in theaters, so I was surprised even to know that it was briefly out in theaters. At the same time, though, man, I had fun with this. It was entertaining enough. It was the last time that, of course, Charles Bronson would play the character. It was one of the very last movies that he did. I think he had a couple of, like, made-for-TV cop movies and stuff after this, but sadly, of course, would pass away a few years after this movie came out. But Death Wish 5, man, like, this is like the ultimate version to get. Now, there are no extras on this. There is the commentary with Paul Talbot, the film historian who does the Bronson books and all that, theatrical trailers. There is slipcover, and it has the exact same artwork on, and I think that's the VHS artwork as well that they reused there. Alright guys, that is it for the video. Wanted to do these two together. They kind of go together, right? Death Wish 4, Death Wish 5. If you've got a taste for some Charles Bronson, I would recommend picking this up in the collection here. Kino Lorber Studio Classics did these two. Very nice editions here. They're priced to move. Kino Lorber stuff is very fairly priced. And the Blu-ray editions of these look great as well. Look classic with the slip covers and everything. If this sort of thing interests you, you'll want to check it out. And be sure to check us out. We're over at deadpit.com. Give us the thumbs up.
Up your butt.
Like, subscribe. And if you subscribe, here's something else you can do. Once you subscribe, you can click the bell notification, right? And it'll notify you anytime that Dead Pit puts up new shit.
Or don't. I really don't give a if you do or
I
don't.
want you to. I want you to.
I don't care.
Let's keep our community growing here on YouTube.
I don't like it. I don't want you to touch nothing.
Listen, they need to do that, pal.
No, don't you dare touch it.
Thumbs up. Subscribe. And click that bell.
There's all kinds of wonderful shirts over at shop.deadpit.com. Simply the best horror shirts. On TeePublic, there are others, but they all suck. You can get some Dead Pit radio shirts. You can get Last South on the Left. The Hills Have Eyes. Texas Chainsaw. Oh, wait, you can't say Texas Chainsaw. All kinds of shirts, folks. You're gonna love them. Shop.deadpit.com.
Thank you to all of our supporters on Patreon. Dead Pit on Patreon.com is the only place to check out a complete archive of the old Dead Pit radio shows all the way back from 2005 on, in addition to the midweek shows, fan commentaries, exclusive podcasts, and much more. Dead Pit on Patreon.com if you're interested. Tiers start at only $1.